Welcome back, everyone, to the Art of a Peaceful Mind. My name is Kim Root, and today we have with us Dr. Keisha Ewers. And I was really interested in her unique way of talking to us about how to heal. She has a lot of great stuff to say. So here she is. Hi, Keisha.
Hi, Kim.
How are you today?
I'm great.
All right.
Glad to join you.
Nice to join. Great to have you here. So I know that what I wanted to start talking to you about was how you healed yourself from rheumatoid arthritis and how that came apart, how that came about, and maybe the story behind that, but mostly how you healed.
Actually, the way that you said it just a second ago, how that came apart, was a really interesting way of prefacing it, even though I know it was a little bit of a mix-up, but still, that's perfect. And I think how we come apart and how we put ourselves back together is a really fascinating journey on the human path of life, and for me, it was definitely a time of coming apart. So up until the time I was about 30, I was raising 4 children, and I worked in a real high intensity medical environment and really quite loved my life. I was a marathon runner and probably couldn't even bend down and touch my toes because my hamstrings were so high, tied at that time. And then I always say, like, all of a sudden, one morning I woke up and I had gained 10 pounds of puffiness over my joints. They were red, they were inflamed, and I could hardly get out of bed. I was in so much pain, and it was like someone had pulled the plug out, and I no longer had any Shakti, any energy. And I was just like this deflated balloon. I was so tired, exhausted. And, this is what most of my patients come in to see me with, that they feel flabby, they feel fatigued, and they feel like they have no mental capacity anymore, called brain fog, and no libido. And they're just like lacking vitality, and they don't know what's wrong. And like them, you go seeking answers. So I went in and I saw my doctor, and I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And when I was asked if I had that in my family, because they were looking for a genetic tie-in, I said, yeah, I think my grandfather had it. And so then, of course, the book gets shut, put back on the shelf, and the answer from my doctor is, well, you drew the short end of the genetic lotto, my dear, and here are 2 prescriptions, for very strong medications, one of which fights cancer, called methotrexate. And so come back, not if you get worse, but when you get worse. And even instead of asking, is there anything else I can do? No, it's genetic. You have no other recourse but to take these medications. And, I said, I'm pretty disciplined. I'll change my diet. Is there anything? No, this has nothing to do with food. So, in those days, I wouldn't have known an herb if it had bitten me on the behind. I always tell people I was purely Western science, Western medicine. And of course, when things fall apart like that, on Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, that's the call to action, right? And you have to go find a mentor. And clearly my framework of medicine wasn't providing that for me, so I went outside of it. And so I went in and to PubMed, where we keep our medical research online, and started looking for, articles, and I found some research indicating yoga was good for autoimmune disease. So I went to my first yoga class, fell in love with it, became a yoga teacher, and in the process learned how to meditate. And during that time, in my meditation, I started really going into this deep inquiry, which I think is so important. Instead of trying to jump out of pain immediately, which is what gets us into that framework of matching a pill to an ill, it was an inquiry of, okay, autoimmune means I'm attacking myself. That means I'm committing suicide, basically, in a societally acceptable way. Why do I want to die? And of course, at that time, I didn't. I had a pretty happy life, and I didn't want to die. But I started asking the right questions, like, when did that start? And that took me back, as I went along my timeline, back to this 10-year-old little girl part of myself that was being sexually abused by the vice principal in my elementary school. And, I thought, oh, that has to have something to do with this. And so I started working on that, doing doing some trauma release therapy, as well as dietary changes and all the functional medicine things that I now do and teach my patients and teach my health coaches how to do. I did all of those. And within 6 months of that, I had that rheumatoid arthritis reversed. So it was like the coming apart was really important, because had I not had my life come apart, then putting it back together in this way that was at a higher developmental level would have never occurred. That's the hero's journey, right?
Right.
So I learned skills. I learned how to feed myself according to my body type. I learned about genetics. I learned about all these things that I would have never been called to really learn about. There's that saying that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So then I was able to come back more skillful and then teach other people, which is that oracle stage of the hero's journey. So I'm giving a TED Talk on January 5th about this, about how disease is actually a call to evolution, right? That you evolve to a new level, a new state of consciousness through it if you're willing to take responsibility and use it in that way.
Right. So it really, yeah, I hear this more and more these days. And so it's very encouraging. And I do see my students get better from all kinds of conditions, just from focusing in and focusing on their breath and feeling what is and all of that. So, yeah, that's amazing. Or it's the way things are these days. So, we were talking earlier about, and I'd like to hear more about the Panchakocha. Is that how you say it?
Yeah. So one of the things I learned, of course, when I went through my yoga teacher training, I learned about Ayurveda. And in that very first yoga class that I attended, my teacher, on the walking across the hardwood floor, I'm holding my first downward dog my whole life, and sweating profusely. And he's talking about this idea of we're not all the same, and that this comes from the world of Ayurvedic medicine. And he said enough that I was interested and went back home and looked it up. And I thought, oh, like every patient that I had treated up until that point that we would call had idiopathic problems in medicine. That's what we say when we don't know what the actual root cause is. We call it idiopathic, which I always say means that we're idiots and we don't know. Ayurveda had an answer for it, because 10,000 years ago with these rishis who were observing humans in their habitat on planet Earth, with each other, with their food, with their seasons, with their times of life and stages of development, actually documented their observations. And the outcome was that, oh, we are not all the same. And the other thing that they noted is we're not just our physical structure, that we have our physical structure, but then the next layer would be called your pranamaya kosha. These koshas are called sheaths. Pancha means 5, kosha means sheath. And so you would say you have your annamaya kosha, which is your physical structure. And I always say that's the one that you feed and water and take for walks. And then you have your pranamaya kosha, which is your energy body. And that's the place where you have these 72,000 nadis, or places where your nerves cross, that are also called chakras. We usually say we only have 7 chakras, but actually we have 72,000 of them. And Chinese medicine is great because these are all your acupuncture points, right? Meridians. And they're connected from that energy body to the physical body and then to the emotional body. That's the connection of our energy body. And then you have your emotional body, then your mental body, and then you have this bliss sheath called your Anandamaya kosha. And that's the place where, when you're out hiking in the woods, or maybe in the shower, or maybe holding a downward dog, that you get an epiphany, right? A solution to a problem, an intuitive spark, a download of information. What Beethoven said would happen in the middle of the night, and he'd have to get up with his quill and just write out whatever new, composition was coming through him. That's from the Anandamaya kosha. That's our place that we are linked to what Carl Jung called our collective unconsciousness. So all answers are contained there, and we have access to all answers. Why there's never any new thought. We just have this access to this library of wisdom. And we all want access to that all the time if we can get it. but we can't have it if we're toxic in any of those other layers. So in other words, if you have an autoimmune disease in your physical structure, you're attacking yourself, that's not just going to be about the physical structure. That's going to be about your genetics, your digestive health, the way that you manage your stress and past trauma, and then your exposure to any toxins that affect all these other layers, and your body's ability to get rid of those toxins, your mind's ability to get rid of those toxins, your heart's ability to get rid of those toxins. Because toxins don't just come in the form of plastics and PCBs and chemicals. They also come in the form of toxic beliefs, toxic thoughts, toxic emotions, or bottling them up, doing what I call a spiritual bypass and saying feeling sad or feeling angry or feeling jealous is actually a negative emotion, therefore I'm not allowed to feel it. It actually just resides in your body instead of allowing yourself to have that feeling so it can move on through, right? And being able to cultivate your observer's mind and notice it and have compassion for yourself. Instead, we say, if we're spiritual, oh, that's a negative thought. That's low vibration. You can't have that. And so I get all these spiritual patients who have been bypassing all of these beliefs and thoughts that were created in childhood because their adult mind won't allow it. And then their child brain is always in fight or flight. And then they have to do yoga or they have to meditate in order to get themselves into an equilibrium state, instead of being able to maintain that throughout their day, no matter what's happening. And so to me, that's a lack of resilience. And that's what I train my patients to do, is not just deal on this, this Anamaya Kosha layer, this physical structure, but also what are the other layers doing? How are they? And being able to check in with them and facilitate clearance of all of them.
Right. So we're all like, everything is connected. So when you got sick, or when you really realized the sickness, when it got bad enough that you realized it, then it seems like a bad thing, but then you have a chance to look back and start to work with some of those layers to clear them, is what you're saying, right? Yeah.
Ultimately, what happens when things fall apart, is, I'm going to come back to your verbiage there, is that we get an opportunity to do what I call reframing your story so you can reclaim your power. I was living in this space without knowing it. From 10 years old, I created this belief system that I had to be perfect to even survive. Because at 10, that was true. Mm-hmm. My vice principal was telling me he was harming me because I was a bad kid. So of course, I'm going to be the most perfect kid that I can possibly be to avoid being called to the principal's office. And so if you carry that, every single person with autoimmune disease is actually a perfectionist, and they may not realize it. And in fact, most people that are perfectionists won't own it, because they see perfection as way up here and they see themselves as way down here, and they go, there's no way I'm a perfectionist. Do you see how far I am from that? Of course, it's only a perfectionist speaking, right?
I've been there myself.
Of course, right? And Ayurveda says that all autoimmune disease is undigested anger. Well, if you're a perfectionist, you also know if you have a spiritual bent in your life, that it's not perfect to feel anger. And so, that means that you're going to be really a people pleaser, and you're going to be a caregiver and be compassionate to everyone else, and, always serving and always giving. Well, that gets people in front of me in my office or on a Zoom link. This is how I see a lot of my patients remotely, because they know now in adulthood that belief from way long ago is not serving them, and in fact could be killing them. So it's a really interesting paradox, because the child brain comes up with a belief or a meaning from the time that it's occurring, and the child brain's not fully developed yet. It's not until we're 26 years old that we have this prefrontal cortex, the adult executive function part of our brain, develop. So when we're children, we'll make up stuff to match what our experiences are that we create if there's not a well-attuned caregiver right there to help us navigate it. And of course, none of us, as a parent, I haven't been present for every one of my children's upsets in their lives. How could you be? And I now realize it's part of the human experience. We're supposed to have it that way. And then we have adulthood to have to go back and reframe that so that we can gain wisdom. So these early events matter not because, oh, you know, I'm this way because I was sexually abused. No, instead what you say is, oh, that happened. I created this belief and this meaning, and now it's running me, and I can see that it's driving me into the ground. And so now I get an opportunity to go back with my adult mind and reframe it. So at the end of that journey, what you end up saying, hopefully, is those things are the best things that ever happened to me, because they were the times I came apart and then put back together in a stronger way. There's a Japanese pottery style called kintsugi, and it's where if a piece of pottery gets broken, it gets put back with gold lacquer, and it's more beautiful usually than it was before it was broken, because these gold lines are in it, you know. And I love that imagery because that's how all of us are. There's a little known Hindu goddess named Akilanda Deshvari, and she's the goddess of never not broken. Because again, all those thousands of years ago, there was this understanding that we're always a work in progress, you know, and we have to come apart like Humpty Dumpty, put ourselves back together again in a different way and move to our next evolutionary stage, you know. So going from caterpillar to butterfly, you know, is a hard work for that butterfly. Not easy work to come out of that cocoon and have mucus dripping off of their wings, and they have to sit there and dry them. And of course, they're vulnerable for any bird getting them in that hour or so before they can get strong enough to fly. So every time we go through a new developmental state, that's how we are. We're vulnerable, we're weak, we feel like we're not going to make it. And then we get stronger as we practice our new skills. So it's really important to be able to say, okay, I see why that happened. And that's that radical acceptance of life as it is, right?
Right. Yeah. It really is a paradox because when you're going through those things, it's so awful. And then you get to the point where you have a chance to recognize that you wouldn't have had the aha or the chance to heal, to become more compassionate if that hadn't happened, like you're saying. But it also, in order to appreciate that part, you have to have a lot of courage to be able to look in the first place, and then to be able to say, oh, I chose that. It's difficult, but it's wonderful. It's really, when you can do that, it's
I never want anyone to hear me say flippantly that this is easy. It's not easy. And, you know, my 27-year-old son says it in a really great way. He says, I was talking about something that had occurred and a misunderstanding with somebody. And he said, well, in their defense, it is very hard to be a person. And I have never forgotten that. You know, it is very hard to be a person. And I think that if you can claim this idea, this different way of perceiving what life is about, that it is a cycle that keeps continuing of death and rebirth, the same as every breath, right, that you take. There's a death with exhalation and a mini rebirth with every inhalation. You know, the seasons, we're in the death time in winter, and then we come back to rebirth, and then, you know, we go through the 4 seasons. That's actually the way our human lives are as we develop. It's cyclical. And what really pisses people off is when they get through a big challenge, they've mastered their skills, they've come back as an oracle and reborn, and now they're like stronger and part of their community as a teacher, and then they get another challenge, you know, and it starts all over again. And that's, I think, if you can really accept that that's what's going to happen, and that's part of your expectations of life, then you won't feel betrayed by life, betrayed by your body, betrayed by people that betray you, or feel betrayed by God or the government or whatever it is that you expect someone to be behaving differently than. And it makes a lot more equanimity if you can get into that flow. Then when these things do happen, the skill you've developed is the understanding that, oh, this is my next challenge. it actually becomes much easier to move through the whole resolution of it and master a new skill, because you know that that's where you're at, what you're supposed to be doing, and that this is actually this giant gift from life, even though it looks like a big sucker punch. I think if we, that right there is a skill, right? Being able to learn how to do that. And when we're young, we don't have that perception or that perspective. But once you've gone through a series of those, you can look back at the cycles and you go, oh yeah. And if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't, oh yeah, okay. And so now at our age, we have this ability to look back on several decades and see where that has been beneficial. I feel so sorry for teenagers and 20-somethings because they could get this on a mental, intellectual level, but they haven't actually been through it that much yet. And so I would never be younger. I love aging.
I have the same feeling, right?
I really like having a perspective of what life is actually about, not what I would wish it were. That's really a recipe for disappointment in perpetuity.
Yeah, I remember at times when I was struggling and people would say, well, what do you want? And I would say, what I really want is wisdom. So when I look back now, I say, well, when you ask for wisdom, you're asking for trouble to go through, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way to gain it without that.
Exactly. There's no way. And I think that's important for people to understand that if life is going really well, right, and you're kind of coasting and you're complacent and happy, that's actually your rest period. It's the time when the seas are calm, and it's the time for you to gain your strength for the next storm. And that is the way it works. I live on an island and I look out and I see the sea every day. And I know that sometimes it's deceptively calm, and then other times it shows its other side, and I always think, gosh, I'm glad I'm not in that right now, And so that's how life is. It's always changing, and Mother Nature is here to demonstrate that to us constantly. And so I think part of our issue is that we're so disconnected from Mother Nature, the way that we live now, living in front of these computer screens and under these electric light bulbs and, on concrete foundations and driving cars. We're just not really hooked into the rhythms and the cycles of nature. And so we tend to think that we own it. And so Mother Nature has a way of dashing that.
Yeah, we definitely don't.
Here's a little bit of autoimmune disease. Here's a little bit of a divorce, or like things that happen to say, no, you never were in control.
Yeah.
You were an illusion. Let me absolve you of that.
So, the name of the show here is The Art of a Peaceful Mind: How to Find Peace, Inner Strength, and Confidently Tap into Your Intuition. So, I'm sure people don't only have a busy mind or have a hard time finding peace or inner strength, that a lot of like sickness and other things are there, irritations and things. But so from that perspective, do you have some starting points or tips for people? How would they start to, where would they start?
I do. And, one of the things I always tell people in terms of just starting is what I call watch your language. And I don't mean like shit damn in hell. I'm talking about like, what is your inner dialogue? And just start observing that for 24 hours. How often do you bypass your feelings and make something go over the top of them that is sweeter, and then reach for something sweet as a result of that? We desire, in Ayurvedic medicine, there are 6 tastes: bitter, sweet, salty, pungent, astringent, and sour. And only one of those 6 are sweet. So we're not real tolerant of the other 5 in our culture. We don't eat them a lot. And I know probably people listening to us right now are a different group than the standard American diet folks. and probably do eat a lot of bitter and astringent. But, you know, the important thing is to move from the ability to tolerate bitter and astringent and sour and pungent and salty taste to also being able to tolerate those on an emotional level and being able to digest them properly. And that's the thing that Ayurveda brings to the table that I love, is digesting your emotions is imperative if you're going to be healthy. And that's mentally and emotionally and spiritually healthy also. So, you know, it's watching your language and your feelings and noting them and then properly digesting them. I write a lot about that, and I wrote this book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle. And this is really has a lot of worksheets. It's kind of a workbook. And it goes through, here's the first step, here's the second step, here's the third step, you know, and it goes on like that. And I have an online program called You Unbroken that if you need trauma healing, that you go to that. But this allows you to kind of start with, oh, this is what I see I need to work with. And then I was in India and got downloaded several years ago a forgiveness process that's kind of the final step. And, you know, people often think about forgiveness as I forgive you. And it's more of a lip service forgiveness instead of going through a process of, oh, I see that I too am you, Tatvamasi, I am that, right? And, oh, I see how this thing that you did that hurt me, and I usually will use like my sexual aggressor as a good example. And I always say, if I can do this, so can anyone, you know? And I look at that and I say, okay, so why did Mr. Johnson, you know, hurt a 10-year-old girl when he was put in a place of authority and supposed to protect children? I could characterize him as evil, and I could characterize him as a child molester and be justifiably upset for the rest of my life about his activities, but that doesn't hurt him, or, you know, it just hurts me, right? And so the really creating a victimization and saying that I am self-righteously judgmental of that doesn't help me in my own evolutionary development spiritually. And so what you do then is you say, okay, so what would drive him to do that behavior? And this practice is in this book. And you say whatever are the ego points that you pick up about that. For me, it was bigotry, because he said I was white trash. I was in an all-black school at the time. I was one of 2 white girls. And so it was very much racially driven. And then another one was, okay, so bigotry, another one was cruelty, and another one was a misuse of power. So I wrote those down when I first started this practice after my time with Ramana Maharshi in a cave getting downloaded. And I saw, oh, okay, so how do I do cruelty? Oh, well, I'm a parent. You know, parents are cruel all the time, you know, in different ways, right? And there have been a million times when I haven't been the most stellar parent, you know, that I could possibly be. So that was easy. And then another one was misuse of power. Oh yeah, I'm a parent. Okay, so I've guilted like this before. That's a misuse of power for sure. So, you know, you go through that and you go, okay, so just because I'm not molesting little children, I'm still misusing power in various ways. If I guilt my kid into do something, that's a misuse of power, right? So I got that clear. Then I got to bigotry and I thought, gosh, I'm not a bigot. I don't even know how do I see myself in this? And I really stewed about it. I was a Navy brat. I lived all over the world. I was always on the reverse end of racism in Japan also. And I thought, how am I a bigot? And then it hit me. I am a bigot against bigots. I'm completely intolerant for people that are intolerant of other people. And I thought, oh, that is bigotry right there. And I am really intolerant for intolerance. And so I got it. I thought, okay. So then I started working on all 3 of those. So in the end, Mr. Johnson becomes this amazing teacher that I can bow to and say, thank you for being my teacher. Now, I don't call him up and have tea with him and tell him that, right? Because he has demonstrated himself to be unsafe. This is years later. He's probably dead anyway. But you don't have to do any of this with a perpetrator. And in fact, reconciliation and forgiveness are 2 different things. Reconciliation only happens if the person has expressed contrition and they are a valuable relationship to you that you want to continue to work with. Forgiveness can be done all by yourself. And so that practice is what helps you to then become a better person as a result of this teacher. We don't always love our teachers or their teachings, right? But we get to learn from them if we choose to. So that's like end stage. I always tell people, I'm not rushing you into forgiveness till you do these other things that go before. And that's another thing that a lot of times people will try to rush forgiveness. But in fact, there are several steps that go before that if it's going to be real and very dynamic spiritually in your evolutionary process. So that's all outlined in this book.
That's great advice and great tips. Yeah, the process of, I mean, there's the whole process of, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. And I remember when I was going through, you know, practicing that, and
yeah,
the teacher was saying, you know, now say, I'm sorry. And in my mind, I just kept thinking, why should I say I'm sorry? I'm not sorry about anything. What did I do? I didn't do anything. I couldn't, for a long time, I couldn't honestly say I'm sorry. I was just like fighting in my head. And then, please, why should I ask for forgiveness? I don't have anything to feel sorry for. And then one day, I think it was the pressure of having, you know, being in a group and having somebody say, this is what you should say, because the part of saying, I love you, or thank you and I love you, that was easier. And it felt like I've never said that to myself before, so I can say it. But one day I was doing it by myself, and all of a sudden I just started saying, I'm sorry to me, like for certain ways. And I was just bawling, but it felt so good. And then all this stuff seemed like small things, but in my mind at that time, they were big, like, oh my God, I treated my sister this way, or I did this, or I did that. And I just kept, it felt so good to say, I'm sorry. And finally I got it. So, yeah.
It's like, you know, when you clean your house really, really well, the baseboards and the outlet or the light fixtures and the walls and the windows and have the carpets cleaned and, you know, redo the oil on your wood furniture, you know, and you're just, everything just sparkles and it smells yummy and it's just so clean. You know, that's your external environment. If you can do that on the internal, it's exponentially more powerful, right? And that's really what that is that you did. You did a little spiritual detox, right? And that's a really important part and aspect of becoming clear and having equanimity and peace of mind, is being able to do that work. But like you noted, there will be some resistance from your ego. And people always say, well, you know, like tame the ego, kill the ego is bad, but the ego is not bad and it shouldn't be killed. And it, you know, you can get into a collaborative relationship with your ego, and that's the best place to be, not a combative one. And, you know, the ego was created to protect your fragile little psyche when you're a little child. It's there for a good reason. And so when you say, I don't have anything, you know, to be sorry for, this person hurt me, that's your ego coming up and saying, wait a second, I don't want to get hurt again. I need to protect you. You know, that's my job. But the job is then for you is to go back to how old do I feel right now? And I feel that resistance inside of me, because when I feel my ego come up, that means I'm operating from a pre-26-year-old state. And that needs to be a collaborative teamwork relationship that's created. Autoimmune disease at the end of the day is you in a combative relationship with yourself. And there's no winner when that happens. There's no peace of mind. And, you know, that's why Western medicine says there's no cure, because as long as it goes, then you just keep deteriorating. There's no winner when you're at war with yourself. And, you know, so I always say I'm here to help people make friends with the person in the mirror, you know, make friends with the woman you see in the mirror. And a lot of people, like you said, have never really honestly felt that deep love for themselves or expressed it or apologized to themselves for the suffering that they have created for themselves. And so it's a very powerful practice. And so I'm so glad that you had that opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking with us today. I want to take the last few minutes and invite you to talk to the listeners about your free gift.
Thank you. So I put together, a habit is formed in 3 weeks, right? Is what science tells us. And so I have this program called the 21-Day Quick Start Guide. And on my website on drkeisha.com, it's under the programs, it's free. I'm sure you can download it from your space too. We'll send you a link that's just for you. And it's 21 days of email. So you need to go in and make sure that we're friends on email, that your server's not saying you're getting spammed. And in that 21 days, I send you these really easy, I call life hacks, that are the first steps balancing your hormones, your first steps to healing your gut, your microbiome, your first steps to detoxing yourself emotionally and mentally and spiritually, and practices that are easy to incorporate. I think that oftentimes people, women in particular, don't conduct self-care is because they're too busy. And, I always say this is an era of we're all trying to be super women, where we're bringing home the bacon, frying it up in a pan, and trying to look hot at the same time. And we're not wired to actually do everything the way that we expect ourselves to. And so this 21-day quick start program are simple things that you can do so you don't feel overwhelmed, that will bring you a little like, oh, that's something I can do. That's something that's manageable. And this will help me get going on getting my hormones, calibrated properly. People often come to me because they want hormone replacement therapy, bioidentical hormones. And when we get down to the bottom of root cause, it's because they're not managing their stress very well. And so their adrenal glands are stealing their ovarian hormone stores. So just giving you hormones doesn't do the trick. You actually need to manage the hole in the bottom of the boat first. And the 21-day quick start guide is for that. Like all the root cause base things that you can do to lay a solid foundation for yourself.
That sounds great. Thank you. We will have a link for that on the page here. So at the bottom, near the bottom of the page, I believe it is. So don't forget to get that. And thank you so much for being here with us, Keisha. And
thank you, Kim.
And everybody else, thank you for coming today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.